You're listening to the Electronic Media Collective Podcast Network. Yeah, it's a mouthful. For more great shows like the one you're about to enjoy, visit electronicmediacollective.com.
Greetings, Earthlings. You're listening to the Pro Wrestling Mothership Network.
Tonight I'm being joined by a very special guest from the Pro Wrestling Torch, Bruce Mithcell. Bruce, how are you doing tonight, sir?
Doing fine.
All
Glad
right.
to be here.
Absolutely, man. We're excited to get you on here and get ready for the big weekend coming up in Waterloo, Iowa here, July 26th, 27th, and the 28th. I kind of wanted to, before we get into that, though, kind of talk a little bit about your wrestling background. You know, a lot of people are familiar with your work from the Pro Wrestling Torch with Wade Keller. Your guys' site has been credited with a lot. I know, especially with Something to Wrestle With, Bruce Pritchard, you guys are referenced on there quite a bit, which is very cool to see. Kind of talk a little bit about, you know, your wrestling background, how you became a fan, how you became connected with Wade at the PWTorch.
Well, I've been working for the PWTorch for Wrestling Torch for this September will be 28 years, and through all the iterations of technology with 900 lines and newsletters and podcasts, and I currently do the Bruce Mithcell audio show with Wade Keller every week on the VIP site. And Wade has figured out that it is the longest running weekly podcast of any type at all, with maybe one exception of a one that does podcast about podcast. We're not sure about that. If someone can find another one, then we'll let them know. So it's been a lot. I became a wrestling fan in the late 1970s. I'm from the Carolinas. I grew up in Durham, North Carolina, and I've lived in Greensboro for many years. And in fact, I live literally within the shadow of the Greensboro Coliseum. It's right up the street here. And I can open my door and see the top of the buildings. And that's, of course, a very famous, historically very important venue in professional wrestling, particularly for the heyday of Jim Crockett Promotions. That, not coincidentally, is what got me into being a wrestling fan. I was told by a friend of mine, you need to see this blonde-haired guy and wrestling. And wrestling had already been on and around, but that blonde-haired guy was Ric Flair, and that really, Ric Flair and Ricky Steamboat really kind of hooked me into, and a whole bunch of other great wrestlers, Roddy Piper and Greg Valentine, a Masked Superstar, Black Jack Mulligan. It was really Jim Crockett Promotions at that time probably had the deepest talent roster of any company in the world, and was really doing big business. So I just thought I was being entertained, but I was also getting educated at the same time. And then probably went 4 or 5 years without knowing anybody. And it's amazing to me, like, how wrestling fans are now with the internet and 24 hours, 7 days a week, information traded, because I bet I went 5 years without knowing another wrestling fan who liked wrestling the way I did. And I would track wrestling in the newspaper stacks. I go find the results of the different shows that I could find at when I was in college instead of studying. And a few years after that, I was lucky enough to run into a friend of mine who I've been friends with for 30 years, John Hitchcock, and he offered me the opportunity to go to wrestling in the Greensboro Coliseum right about at the time the Full Horseman was getting really big, and Dusty Rhodes, the Full Horseman, Rock and Roll Express, the Midnight Express, all that stuff. And he had a group of friends who who had permanent front row seats. And so for I don't know, 6 or 7 years monthly at the Greensboro Coliseum, I got to attend wrestling there, and and saw some really good stuff, and it was a lot of fun, and we all kind of dedicated to rooting for bad guy fans. Rooting for bad guys. We loved the Horsemen, didn't like Dusty Rhodes, that kind of thing, and loved Midnight Express, didn't like the Rock and Roll Express, and had a good time. We knew what it was, but we had a lot of fun with it, and bring signs and just carry on, and just have a good time. And so at some point in that time, in the mid '80s. I started subscribing to the Wrestling Observer, Dave Meltzer's Wrestling Observer. And after a year or two of that, started writing letters to the Wrestling Observer. And I would write long letters, and people liked them. And Wade Keller was starting his business. Was a teenager at that time and was getting strong reviews for what he was doing. And I met him in Baltimore at the Bash, where Ric Flair lost to Sting. It was supposed to be the end of the Ric Flair era, and so we had traveled up to the Bash to see that. And so I sent in a column unasked to Wade, and he published it. And then I don't know how long after that was. Within a month or two, he called me up and said, "Would you like to write a column for me every month?" And that was September of 1990. So. Started writing columns ever since then, and that's my background. I've been to a lot of places, and been to Mexico in the bull ring, been to pretty much everywhere, but Madison Square Garden. I've never been to Madison Square Garden, but I've been to a lot of wrestling in a lot of different places, and this area here in the Carolinas has recently been a pretty strong area for independent wrestling, so that's been cool to see too. But it's an interesting thing to write about. There's just so much. You get everything. You get shady stuff. You get inspirational stuff. You get crime and drugs and sex and rock and roll and all kind of, and politics and everything. Everything there is to write about in life can come through professional wrestling. So it's really interesting and fun job to have. So I've enjoyed it and still do. And one of the highlights of it the last few years has been coming to Waterloo, Iowa for the Trago Stes Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame. So I'm definitely looking forward to, in a couple of weeks, heading back up to Waterloo, Iowa.
Absolutely. Has it surprised you in any way, like how big the Torch has gotten since you've come in? We've seen over the years the podcast industry has just boomed. The one that I currently have with my normal co-host, we've had ours since 2010, and even before then we did a little version of a podcast in college. And just even since 2010, seeing the amount of podcasts that have come is just is almost mind blowing. Is it the same way for you as far as seeing how much the Torch has grown?
Oh, definitely. It's a thing where I have another job. I'm a school teacher, and you work towards your other job, and you have goals, and you want to make, you want to get a certain number of years in, you want to get tenure, you want to get this and that and the other thing, and you work towards them. With the Torch, I've worked hard on the Torch, and it gave me a chance to write, which I've really been gratifying, and to get response back from your writing is so powerful. And I get responses, I get positives and I get negatives. I try to write, I try to tell the truth as much as I can, and so that can happen. But everything, I just take it as it comes, and I'm amazed at it. And I'm amazed that, there's experiences that build on each other that are, that I look back on and go, I can't believe that I got the opportunity to do that. And I remember my first time in Waterloo at the Hall of Fame banquet. Wade and I sat with Charlie Fez and Jim Londos' daughter and son, and George Tragos, I believe's son. You can't sit with any, as far as professional wrestling goes. There is no more royalty than that. And that was I was just kind of awestruck. It was an amazing experience. And a few years before that, I was at an NWA Legends Fan Fest, and I sat down at the table that they put me at. I sat in the wrong seat, and I sat in this I sat in this guy's girlfriend's seat, and he started fussing at me. He was like, "Hey, man, that's my girlfriend sitting there. What are you doing?" And that was Conrad Thompson, and we became close friends just from hanging out there. And I would go and hang out with him, and he is what he sounds like on the air. So I've got to know him before he became such a successful podcast guy. And so that's been really cool to see. I've seen just by being around, I've seen a lot of people, on these journeys that are pretty amazing. And he's the epitome of the American dream. That's not a joke, and not an exaggeration, I should say. And so, as someone who built his own business from the ground up, but yeah, that's pretty fun. Although it is, there are times when I wonder, after all this work, that there's certainly a segment of wrestling fans that know me as some jack off from Greensboro, thanks to Bruce Pritchard. So I mean, it's part of life, and I kind of think I paid him back for that. So I'm cool with it. So that's you have to take some things tongue in cheek, some things you don't take tongue in cheek. But that's it's a ride, and it's a lot of fun, and it's cool to see. So
I will say this: I don't feel like Bruce gives you guys as hard of a time as he gives Meltzer on his show. That's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, he gives us a hard time. It's that I was there, and it's that's great. And people seem to people seem to buy into that a little bit, but but objectively and taking things all together and putting them and figuring them out without an agenda or without trying to push. Make sure that Vince McMahon is happy, or make sure that you're okay about getting a job somewhere else at any time. I mean, that's what you're looking for. To me, that's what you're looking for in journalism. So I don't. Sometimes when people are bitching and howling in the wrestling business about something that's been written or something that happened, it's a good thing. And with Pritchard is an entertaining, smart guy, but. I wouldn't say he's always accurate, so that's kind of fun. But he and Dave Meltzer have known each other since they both started their careers, and so there's kind of there's some things, there's some heat, I suspect, way back, and also just here's one guy trying to do one kind of job, and here's another guy trying to hype himself up. So it's interesting.
Now, before we move on to the Hall of Fame weekend, I did want to ask you one real quick question when it comes to the Torch. For you, what was the biggest story that you have ever broken that you can remember?
Probably the column I wrote about. It wasn't a pleasant column or a nice column, but the column I wrote about the mass transit incident with New Jack and ECW. There was a lot of implications with that, and I got scapegoated by ECW and their, and a lot of people who were pushing them as a cause, as some sort of, that I had done something I didn't do, and that I was the cause of their problems, and not the people in the company, including New Jack, that did this and allowed it to happen. So. Yeah, that was really a big deal, and it was. I mean, I stand by every word. I was proud of what I wrote, but I also it was an enormous pain for a while. And yeah, I mean, there's always something. I mean, there's been several things. So Brian Pillman. There's been a new book about Brian Pillman and covering Brian Pillman and the. And his marketing con to get himself a big contract was really interesting and a lot of fun to do. And then just watching careers. I mean, I think I've written a ton about Vince McMahon over the years, and just watching how people's careers go up and down and back and forth. And then I have to say too, covering the steroid trial in Long Island. Going to that trial, Wade was there every day of the trial. I was there for, I think, 3 or 4 days, and the intricacies of that situation. I was really proud of the work we did, and that was So there's been, the Chris Benoit murder suicide, even recently with New Day and the pancakes. I mean, there's always been something. So it's a volatile business. So if you're paying attention, there's always something to write about. There's something cool to write about. There's something not so cool to write about. And I do enjoy doing because I'm old now, so I've seen a lot of wrestling, and I read a lot about these guys and met a lot of them and all that kind of stuff. So when someone passes away, it's kind of my unofficial job to go up on a podcast and talk about their career in depth. And while I very much regret they passed away, that it's good to be able to give these major figures and maybe not as well known as they should be figures their due that way. So that's been cool. And got to be a talking head in some documentaries. So that was to the chagrin of my friends and family. So that's been fun.
Very cool, very cool. Now, moving to the Hall of Fame weekend, how did you guys first get, I guess, brought into the fold? Because you had talked before we went on here that it was this upcoming year is your fourth year coming to the Hall of Fame. So kind of talk about how you and Wade got connected with the Wrestling Museum and the Hall of Fame weekend.
Well, there are VIP members who would always tell them, you need to come to this. I mean, there's a Hall of Fame, there's a museum. I mean, there's always that complaint about the WWE Hall of Fame isn't a real thing, isn't a real physical place. And, here's this museum in Waterloo, that features amateur wrestling and professional wrestling, and they have this great weekend, and you guys should come. And I think of Dan Kuster, who's on one of the boards, as someone like this, and he would always say that. And they have a journalist award, and they every year, and they gave it 4 years ago to Wade Keller, and so I'm not missing that. And so we went up there, and it's the perfect mix to me. I've been to Legends things and Fan Fest and all that, and I always have a good time. But this one there's a real strong historic foundation that they have, and then you've got the strong amateur athletes that transition over into professional wrestling. They're really honored because of Lou Thesz is such a major part of, and his widow Charlie Thesz are such a major part of building this museum. And so you get that respect between those two spheres, and they're really connected to each other. And it's big, but it's not too big. You get the cool indie show, Impact Pro Wrestling show, and I always have a good time at that. And to me, it's really interesting to see how independent wrestling in the Midwest compares to independent wrestling that I see the most, which is in the Southeast. And there's things that are same, there are things that are different. I always learn something from that. But then also, if you want to talk to wrestlers, if you want to hang out or sit at a panel, you're right up with them. It's like you can talk to them, you can ask your questions, and you can hang out and go down the street and have a libation or two with them, and that's really cool too. And I'd always am gratified to meet people that have read the Torch over the years, and particularly ones reading it now. But that's really and then the banquet too. It's you see some amazing things, and you get the chance to participate a little bit, to contribute a little bit by doing live podcasts. Like last year, we did a live podcast with Stan Hansen and JJ Dillon, and we got an opportunity to sit on a panel with Gerald Briscoe and Wes Briscoe and about independent wrestling in the country, and just to be able to give back a little bit was really cool. As I say, I take these things as they come, but this is what I go as part of the Torch, but it's also something I just really look forward to every year. I've gotten these 4 years that I've really thought is just the right mix of not too small and right mix of not too big. And then I tell you what, I'm always going to sit in that library and go through the stuff and go through the books and the magazines and the artifacts that they have about professional wrestling too. It's like I always love reading that stuff and talking to historians and writers and all that. So it's just a great mix of cool things to do.
Absolutely, and the museum itself is incredibly cool too. I think they have a singlet from just about every college around the country that has a wrestling program. So when you walk in there, you see all these singlets just hanging up, and that's just cool to see. Just like stuff like that, and they have.
I love that. If I can interrupt, I love when you walk in. There's this huge oil painting of Abraham Lincoln wrestling. And that's just, I'm just like, that's dead on. And I so much remember standing in the museum my first time I was there, and I'm kind of, just looking at all, as you said, the singlets from the colleges and the displays from the professional part. And I'm just standing there, and I see this man like to the side of me, and he's got a ball cap on, and all of a sudden it hits me. Oh my! And because I'm looking at him, a painting of him on the wall, and there he is standing there, and it's Dan Gable. And for my generation, and really for anybody that knows wrestling and particularly knows college and Olympic wrestling, Dan Gable. I mean, I remember watching him, win those gold medals, and he is as iconic in his sport as anybody you can name in any sport at all. I just stood and looked at him because, damn, there's Dan Gable. So, and you get to see, and a little bit later on, I saw Kurt Angle do the same thing. Looking at Dan Gable, he had trained with him some, and the Iron Sheik who had Kaiser Vasiri, who had gotten to the United States in part because the University of Minnesota and the connections with Gable and the University of Iowa and all that. Just to see those interactions. And there's a lot of little moments like that. I mean, I remember Magnum TA being there a year or two ago and seeing him on his scooter, and he's coming around. I see him from time to time, and he gets off the scooter and walks into the room where they're having the meeting, and I'm just like, oh my God, look at that. And, because I remember very much Magnum and his car accident and everything that went along with that. So there's big moments and little moments, and they're pretty cool. I got my hand. We did a podcast with Bob Backlund, which meant that I slapped hands with him, and that doesn't sound like very much, but geez, it hurts. He's not playing. It's like he's in tremendous shape, and then he did it during the banquet. I'm like, oh my God, I gotta put my hand up again. Pow! And I'm like, oh. So,
well, I remember. I remember the year that Bob was there. I was walking around the museum, and I look over in the little. There's off to the side. There's a little area, kind of like a little mini wrestling room that has a mat and has bleachers. And I kind of stop and turn around and look, and there's Bob doing step-ups on the bleachers, and I'm just like,
yeah.
And I know I walked by his room one day too. He had the door wide open. I think he was doing some type of exercise too. I'm like, good Lord, that man never stops.
No, he doesn't. Yeah, and it's a tremendous. He's an interesting guy, and it's a tremendous deal. And so, he's doing those. He wasn't doing that to show off. It's just what he does.
Yep.
It's what that's how he lives his life, to stay in that kind of tremendous, cardiovascular shape is important. So important to him. So you have all those kind of moments, and it's always, and it's also just those things where I go, what's this? And I look, and to me, I always kind of consider myself a student of professional wrestling, so trying to learn more. And there's always little puzzle pieces that fit together, or here's something I didn't know about, and it's a major deal, and so let me find out about it. And that's really neat. But you look at the history, it's like the history of, and the people who saw that, Jack Tiger Pisak ring jacket, where that was and what was going on with it. It's pretty amazing. And the people in that Hall of Fame too, you're just like the portraits as Rob Schomburger does of them, and you're just like, damn, it's a cross section from modern days to to all the way back to the origins of professional wrestling. So it's like I said, I look forward to it. It's a cool deal.
Absolutely, and you guys are also a part of the festivities again this year on Friday afternoon at 2:30 after the first round of the Hall of Fame Classic. You guys are going to be doing another podcast. Do you have any idea of what this year's topic or who you'll be talking with is going to be yet?
Yeah, we do. It's going to be Larry the Axe Hennig, who's a staple there, but it's going to. I really am looking forward to trying to. What a history the Hennig family has, what a history he has. And I think he goes there to have a good time and kind of, laugh with his cronies and his friends like Baron von Raschke. I'm not really sure he's there to, he's there to be deep, but I'm looking forward to trying to pull some more out of him. And Nikita Koloff, who I watched pretty much his career from the beginning to the end, here in the Carolinas, and we talked to him before, and he should, and you think, well, that's two different eras and two different types of, two completely different types of wrestlers, but they share in common the fact that they are, right out of Minneapolis, right out of Minnesota. So we ought to have an interesting conversation. I'm looking forward to that. And man, Larry Hennig, I know you've seen him, but it's like he's in his 80s, and that guy is a giant. It's like
that he is.
He is big. It's like it's like no doubt he'd have been a wrestling star in any era. He's huge. So that's always so. We'll hopefully that will go well, and people watching and get a chance to ask questions. And one of the highlights of my life was getting a chance to do that with Stan Hansen and of course J.J. Dillon. So that was really fun, and it was also one of those things where you could see Stan Hansen kind of going, okay, they're going to ask me about the things that really are important in my career, and we're going to and it's going to give me a chance to like relax and talk about things I want to talk about. And that to me is the job, is to facilitate them being comfortable and sharing with the rest of us. And Hansen was tremendous, so that was a good deal.
Absolutely. Now, I did want to ask you one more thing here. This is your fourth year coming to the museum. For anybody that is new that's coming to the Hall of Fame weekend, what are some tips and tips that you would have for a first timer that's coming to the museum or the Hall of Fame weekend?
Pretty much everything is within walking distance, and Waterloo is an interesting town. It's got a good vibe to it. To me, it's nice ambiance, and I'm not someone who's been spent a lot of time in the middle of the United States, and so it's been cool for me to get to do that. But everything's within walking distance of the hotel and the Five Brothers, the Coliseum, and then walking down to the museum. So that's nice. And one thing that Wade and I definitely discovered is there's a lot of cool restaurants and bars around in the area. And so just go explore a little bit. That's pretty nice. And then there's usually the wrestlers and the people involved in everything, from the indie show to the banquet and all that, usually hang out at one particular bar. So you can go over there, and lots of fans, but it's a cool atmosphere. It's not people being jerks or being pushy or anything like that. It's just everybody just hanging around and talking from table to table. So I would just say be prepared to walk a little bit, but not too far, and take advantage of Waterloo itself. I know we always go to, it's a bar filled with, it's the Record something. Anyways.
Yeah, I know which one you're talking about.
Yeah, it has albums on the album covers on the walls, but what we noticed is we've been there. We always go visit there, and we may not have the same, from year to year, we don't have the same bartenders or anything, but they've got that same cool attitude. It's a good hangout place, and so there's, as I said, and there's there's some cool diners and some nice restaurants, and you can just hang, and you can hang out in the lobby of the hotel and see people go by where you go, wait a minute, was that? That's that I always like that. That's fun.
Absolutely. There's you were talking about the restaurants. A couple of years ago, my brother-in-law and I discovered for breakfast one morning there's a place called Newton's Cafe, which is about maybe 4 miles, maybe a little less from the hotel. It was just across that river. That you just walk right across the river there, and it's there, and it's
okay.
It's a fun little, like a kind of a mom pause cafe basically, and they had delicious breakfast food, which now for us has become one of our mainstays. So that's the Newton's Cafe there in Waterloo. That's one of my suggestions to check out if you're there.
Definitely. You can find those types of places, and it's and that's part of the appeal, I think, is not just there, and there's wrestling, between the panels during the day and the wrestling show on Friday, and then the wrestling show Friday night. There's always wrestling stuff to do, but then when you need that break, there's some other things to do too. So I like it. It's one of my favorite things.
Absolutely, you guys. And if you guys still need tickets for the whole weekend, feel free to call the Wrestling Museum at 319-233-0745. Now, Bruce, before we let you go here, I have one quick question for you, and I think the wrestling world has been kind of up in arms about this one. Are we going to see Brock Lesnar at SummerSlam?
Yeah, I think so. We're going to see him one more. My guess is, and this is a guess because they're keeping a tight lid on it, is one more Big Show appearance to defend the Universal title. I would very much think it's against Roman Reigns, and then a Monday Night Raw appearance, and that's about the story. But yeah, I think that he's not gone. He's not gone out of there, and it was a deliberate decision not to talk about him on Monday night. I question that decision, but it was a legitimate decision. It was just the feeling was they've got a Sunday night show. They've got Extreme Rules, and the big match for Extreme Rules is going to be Bobby Lashley and Roman Reigns, and that talking about Brock Lesnar would distract from it. I think that's kind of crazy, but because it distracted from it anyway. And
right.
It was a big deal Saturday night on UFC when he made that challenge. So we'll see him. I wrote about this in this week's newsletter more. How they've gone astray with the Universal title and Brock Lesnar, and made some suggestions about maybe what in the future after this all passes by that they could just some easy ways to not fall into that ever again. Absolutely.
Now, Bruce, if people want to stay in touch with you, where can they find you out on the social media machine?
I'm on Twitter at Mitchell PWTorch, and I'm on Instagram at Bruce Mithcell. You can go to PWTorch.com. Lots of free content, including some of mine, and highly recommend people getting the Wade Keller audio show on Podcast One. There's a lot of content every week for free, and then go to PWTorch.com/GoVIP, and GoVIP you get a library of virtually every written word that Wade Keller's put in the torch for the last 30-some years. Virtually every one of my columns, lots of reading to do, tons of podcasts we do. I do 3 hours every week of the Bruce Mithcell audio show, divided up into shows, and we cover everything from what's happening moment to moment, professional wrestling, to the history of it. And we saw and wrote about a lot of things in time. So if you've got a favorite era of wrestling the last 30 years, you can go back and see what was written by, what we wrote and what we and who we interviewed and all the rest of it, and see it when it happened. And there's a reason why Conrad Thompson, when he works with Tony Schiavone and Bruce Pritchard and Eric Bischoff, uses the Observer and uses the Torch to kind of keep things centered, and because we've seen it and we write about it, and we write about it objectively. We'll tell you the bad stuff, we'll tell you the good stuff, and all that. I do want to say, when you come to Iowa, when you come to Waterloo, and if you see me, come say hello. I mean, that it really is a big part of why and what we're doing there. So come say hello and talk to me and hang out. I mean, it's a really cool deal.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. Now, you guys heard it there from Bruce Mithcell himself. Now, guys, again, the weekend is July 26th, 27th, and the 28th. If you need tickets for that weekend, again, I'm going to give you the phone number for the museum right now. That is 319-233-0745. Bruce, we want to thank you again for your time here tonight. And, guys, we will see you at the show in July.
You're listening to the Electronic Media Collective Podcast Network. Yeah, it's a mouthful. For more great shows, visit electronicmediacollective.com.